Rolls-Royce makes some of the world's most luxurious cars. A Rolls-Royce car does not come cheap.
This is the Bugatti Divo, and if I seem a little bit twitchy today, it's because it is literally the only one in existence.
The most expensive new production car in the world costs roughly $32 million, and only 4 exist, every one already placed with a buyer before the public ever knew the car was real. That is the Rolls-Royce Droptail. It is not the only car in this story built around that exact same rule. The Bugatti Chiron Profilée sold out before its own unveiling.
One of the most exclusive cars on the market today can go from 0 to 60 in less than 2.5 seconds. The Bugatti Chiron can reach speeds up to 261 miles an hour. It is said to be the fastest production car in the world.
The Pagani Zonda HP Barchetta exists in exactly 3 units. Even stranger, one of the rarest cars here was never built for a billionaire at all. Let's discuss these things. The new rules of hypercar access, and why money alone no longer opens the door. The new rules of the hypercar game. For most of automotive history, exclusivity meant one simple thing: price. If a car cost enough, only the wealthiest buyers could afford it, and that scarcity alone did the work of keeping ordinary drivers out. That model still exists at the lower end of the ultra-luxury market. But at the absolute top, among the rarest hypercars being built today, a different and considerably stranger system has taken hold. Price is no longer the barrier. Access is. Being able to write a check for tens of millions of dollars does not automatically put a name on the list. In more and more cases, the manufacturer decides who gets asked in the first place.
It was designed and constructed with 3 principles of the late Bugatti. Number 1, the cars will be handmade. Number 2, form follows performance. 3, nothing too beautiful, nothing too expensive.
How does an industry built for over a century on selling cars to whoever can pay for them arrive at a point where paying is not even the main obstacle? The shift traces back to how these companies now think about their most valuable machines. A hypercar limited to 3 or 4 units is not really being sold as transportation anymore. It is being placed, deliberately, carefully, and often quietly, with buyers the manufacturer believes will represent the brand well, maintain the car properly, and in some cases, never resell it to the wrong kind of attention. Reputation management has become part of the sales process itself, layered directly on top of the price tag. Several of the cars driving this shift never even reached a public showroom floor. Allocations for certain ultra-limited models have reportedly sold out before the vehicle was formally unveiled to the world, offered first and exclusively to a manufacturer's most loyal existing clients, the collectors who already own 3 or 4 cars from the same brand, who show up at private factory events, who have a decade-long relationship with the company before a new model is even announced. Does that kind of quiet, invitation-only allocation still count as a sale in the traditional sense? Only technically. Functionally, it looks considerably more like being handed membership in a club that was never advertised as accepting new members. That shift has changed what ownership itself actually represents inside these circles. A number of the rarest hypercars on the road today reportedly spend the overwhelming majority of their lives parked inside climate-controlled private collections, in Dubai, in Monaco, in Los Angeles, appearing publicly.
Welcome to First Motors in Dubai. This is the world's most extreme car dealership with over $100 million worth of cars.
Only at tightly controlled concours events or private manufacturer gatherings, organized specifically for existing clients. Some owners inside this world have reportedly come to view mileage itself as a form of damage to the asset, no different from a scratch on the paint or a tear in the leather. Why would anyone spend tens of millions of dollars on a car built for speed and comfort, only to keep it parked and largely untouched? Because for a growing share of this buyer pool, the driving experience was never really the point. Ownership itself, and everything it signals, became the actual product being purchased. Unlimited money, in other words, does not automatically guarantee access to the rarest machines being built right now. It guarantees eligibility. At best, a seat at a table that a manufacturer still has to choose to invite you toward. Inside elite ownership circles, simply being offered the chance to buy one of these cars has reportedly become a status marker in its own right, entirely separate from whether the offer is ever accepted. That distinction, subtle as it sounds, is exactly what makes the rest of this story so strange, and exactly why the examples that follow matter as much for what they represent as for what they actually are. There is also a financial logic underneath all of this that goes beyond simple brand image. Treating a hypercar as a curated placement rather than an open sale changes how that car behaves as an asset over time. A limited-run machine, sold quietly to a handful of vetted collectors, tends to hold, and often increase, its value far more reliably than one that was ever available to anyone willing to pay list price. Manufacturers understand this dynamic as clearly as the collectors do.
It exists in this beautiful luxury world all of its own. We believe that it exists without competition.
Every time a company controls exactly who receives one of these cars, it is also, indirectly, protecting the long-term value of every other unit already sold. Does that mean exclusivity is really about branding, or is it just as much about basic asset management dressed up in more elegant language? Realistically, it is both at once, working together rather than in competition. That is also why so many of these transactions happen almost entirely outside public view. Traditional car buying leaves a visible trail: a dealership visit, a listed price, a delivery date announced to the world. The kind of allocation this video is describing leaves almost none of that. A phone call from a client relationship manager, a private visit to a design studio, a build slot confirmed quietly. Could an industry built for so long on public spectacle really keep functioning if its most valuable transactions happened entirely in private? For the handful of manufacturers operating at this level, the answer has clearly become yes. For an industry once defined by glossy public launches and packed auto show floors, that shift toward near-total privacy at the very top of the market represents its own kind of quiet revolution. Inside the world's most exclusive Rolls-Royce, no car illustrates this new reality more clearly than the Rolls-Royce Le Rose Noir Droptail. As of 2026, it stands as the most expensive new production car in the entire world, with an estimated price tag of roughly $32 million. Only 4 units exist, not 4 available for order. 4 total, ever, full stop. Each one was built for a specific buyer the company had already identified, with design elements tailored directly to that individual's taste, rather than offered as configurable options on a standard order sheet. The car's design draws its inspiration from the black Baccarat rose.
So as touched on, La Rose Noire is inspired by the black Baccarat rose.
A detail that sounds almost whimsical until you understand how deeply it shaped the actual construction. Handcrafted wood panels run throughout the interior, matched and finished by artisans working on a scale most manufacturers reserve for museum pieces rather than functioning automobiles. Every one of the 4 units carries bespoke design elements unique to its individual owner, meaning no 2 Droptails, despite sharing a name and a starting concept, are actually identical to one another in any meaningful sense. Is that level of individualized craftsmanship even possible to replicate at scale? Or does it only work precisely because there are only 4 of them? The honest answer is the second one. Scarcity is not a side effect of this level of customization. It is the entire foundation. The pricing and the process are both built on. Consider what $32 million actually represents in automotive terms. That figure sits well above the price of most private jets, considerably above the cost of many yachts, and firmly in territory usually reserved for fine art at major auction houses, rather than vehicles meant to be driven on public roads. And yet the Droptail is, technically, road legal, capable of being driven, insured, and maintained like any other car.
We wanted to create a design that was entirely timeless. So here to carefully balance the demands that we have with it being a modern motor car, technologically, the assistances that you need and the functionality.
Even though almost nothing about how it was built, sold, or is likely to be used resembles a typical car purchase in any way, getting access to one of these 4 units required considerably more than simply having $32 million available to spend. Rolls-Royce, like the other manufacturers building at this level, buyers are identified, approached, and worked with directly by the company's bespoke design division, a process that can stretch across years before a single panel of wood is even cut. Does that process still qualify as buying a car in any conventional sense? Barely. It looks considerably more like being commissioned as a patron might commission a painting, except in this case, the finished work happens to have a drivetrain, 4 wheels, and a top speed. What makes the Droptail worth examining so closely in a story about billionaire access is exactly what it reveals about where genuine automotive exclusivity now sits. It is not measured in horsepower anymore, and it is barely measured in price. It is measured in whether a manufacturer ever calls you in the first place. And for the vast majority of even extraordinarily wealthy people, that call simply never comes. Rolls-Royce's own coach-building division, the team responsible for projects at the Droptail's level, operates almost like a private atelier rather than a conventional automotive department. Designers, engineers, and craftspeople work directly with a single client across an extended timeline, treating each commission as its own standalone project rather than a variation on an existing model.
When our clients interact with us, they don't need a car. They've typically got lots of cars. They want to create a masterpiece, and that could be happening here.
How many car companies anywhere in the world could justify dedicating years of staff time to a single buyer's vision? Almost none, at any price point below this one. That process explains why a run of only 4 cars can still occupy years of dedicated work. Every hour spent is hours spent on one specific person's vision. Few other manufacturers in the world operate at that scale of individualized attention for a production vehicle, and fewer still can justify the economics of doing so. It is worth asking what happens to a car like this once it actually changes hands, if it ever does again. Machines built this individually, for this specific a buyer, rarely re-enter any kind of open market in a conventional sense. Even be expected to hold appeal for a completely different owner down the line? That uncertainty is part of what makes bespoke commissions like the Droptail function almost like fine art rather than automobiles, valuable precisely because of how personal and irreplaceable each one is, rather than despite it. The car that sold out before it existed. Bugatti's contribution to this story starts with a car that, technically, should not exist as a standalone model at all. The Chiron Profilée began as a request from some of Bugatti's most valued existing clients, who wanted the handling-focused character of the extreme Chiron Pur Sport.
The Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport. What a beast. Well, the Chiron Pur Sport is kind of like the standard Chiron,
combined with a more classically elegant body style. Work on such a car began soon after that request landed, but by the time pre-production models were ready, every single build slot for the standard Chiron lineup had already sold out entirely. Rather than quietly shelving the project or forcing it into an already full production run, Bugatti made an unusual choice. Instead of selling the finished Profilée directly to a client the way it typically handles bespoke requests, the company auctioned the single completed model through RM Sotheby's. Why would a manufacturer route one of its most exclusive creations through a public auction house instead of simply handing it to whichever loyal client asked for it first? Because doing so let market demand itself set the final price, rather than an internal negotiation. The one-of-one Profilée went on to become one of the most expensive new Bugattis ever sold at auction, and it holds the distinction of being the fastest accelerating Chiron ever built, faster even than the Pur Sport that originally inspired it. That sequence of events, a request from top clients, a build slot problem nobody anticipated, and an auction that turns scarcity into a spectacle in its own right, captures exactly how unpredictable access to these vehicles has become. There was no waiting list a determined billionaire could simply climb by offering more money. There was, for a period of time, no way to buy the car at all, at any price. The Bugatti Divo tells a related, built for buyers who considered the standard Chiron too common and too accessible, despite its own steep price tag. The Divo exists in exactly 40 units worldwide.
The Bugatti Divo, one of the most exclusive Bugatti hypercars, it's only limited to 40 units worldwide.
It shares the Chiron's staggering 1,479 horsepower quad-turbo W16 engine, but wraps it in a specially designed, more aerodynamically focused body, with buyers given extensive freedom to customize paint, leather, and individual components to their own specification. Named after Albert Devo, a Bugatti works driver and former Air Force pilot from the 1920s, the car carries a piece of the brand's racing history directly into its identity. Does attaching that kind of historical weight to a modern hypercar actually change how collectors value it? For buyers who care as much about heritage as horsepower, it clearly does. 40 units sounds, on paper, considerably more accessible than 3 or 4. In practice, it functions almost identically as an exclusivity mechanism. Bugatti did not open general orders and wait to see who showed up with a checkbook. The Devo's build slots moved through the same client-first channels that increasingly define this entire segment of the industry. Can genuine enthusiasm and a full bank account, on their own, secure one of these 40 cars? Not reliably, not without the kind of standing relationship these manufacturers have quietly made into a prerequisite. The Profilée's auction result also revealed something worth pausing on about how these two systems, private allocation and public auction, actually compare when they occasionally intersect. Once bidders were free to compete openly for the one-of-one Chiron, the price climbed rapidly, driven purely by scarcity and reputation, rather than by anything Bugatti itself controlled directly. Does that outcome suggest the private allocation model is actually leaving money on the table? Manufacturers at this level are rarely optimizing purely for the highest possible sale price on any single unit. They are optimizing for which specific names end up associated with the brand, and an open auction, however lucrative, hands that decision to the market rather than keeping it in-house. That tension between control and pure profit sits at the center of almost every decision Bugatti and its peers make about their rarest builds. A private sale to a long-standing client protects the brand's image and its future relationship with that buyer. A public auction, like the one that eventually placed the Profilée, generates headlines, spectacle, and a price point that reinforces the model's mystique for everyone watching from outside. Increasingly, manufacturers appear willing to use both approaches, the 3 of-a-kind machines. If Bugatti represents scarcity, measured in dozens of units, Pagani represents scarcity, measured in single digits, and sometimes in numbers so small they barely register as a production run at all. The Pagani Zonda HP Barchetta exists in exactly 3 examples, not 3 trim levels. 3 cars, period, built once and never repeated.
This is a one of 3. There are only 3 of these in the world. This is quite literally number 1 of the Barchetta,
making it one of the rarest hypercars anywhere in the world, regardless of price, brand, or era. Pagani's approach to this level of exclusivity runs through a division of the company called Grandi Complicazioni, reserved specifically for the brand's most demanding and most established clients. The Huayra Imola Roadster emerged from that division as an even more extreme version of the standard Huayra, pushing output to 838 horsepower while generating roughly 900 kilograms of downforce through an aggressive aerodynamic package built specifically for track-focused driving. Only 8 examples were ever produced. Is there a meaningful difference between owning one of 8 cars and owning one of only 3, once you are already operating at numbers this small? At a certain point, the distinction stops mattering to anyone outside the small circle of people who actually own one. The Huayra Codalunga pushes the scarcity even further, while telling perhaps the most interesting origin story of any car in this entire list. Only 5 were ever built, and the entire project began not from a Pagani design brief, but from a direct request by 2 wealthy collectors who wanted a long-tail version of the Huayra, inspired specifically by the elongated racing silhouettes of 1960s Le Mans cars. Pagani agreed to build it. The result stretched the rear end of the standard Huayra by 36 centimeters, powered by a twin-turbo V12, producing 830 horsepower. Think about what that origin story actually means for how access works at this level of the market. The Codalunga did not begin as a Pagani product waiting for buyers to discover it. It began as two specific collectors requesting something that did not yet exist, and Pagani deciding their request was worth building around. How many people in the world could realistically make that same request and expect a serious response from a manufacturer of Pagani's caliber? The number is vanishingly small, and it has almost nothing to do with how large their bank account happens to be. It has everything to do with an existing relationship, established credibility inside the brand's own client circle. Every road legal example across these ultra-limited Pagani models remains, on paper, available to be driven on public streets like any other car. In practice, spotting even one of them in ordinary traffic would be close to impossible, given how few exist and how carefully most owners keep them tucked away inside private collections rather than out where casual attention might find them. Pagani's decision to build entire sub-brands within its own brand, a division that exists purely to serve its most demanding handful of clients, says something meaningful about where the true center of gravity sits inside ultra-luxury manufacturing today. It is no longer enough for a company to simply offer its best car to its best customer. The most successful manufacturers at this level have built entire internal structures dedicated to identifying which clients deserve the next tier of access, long before that next tier of car even has a name attached to it. Does that level of internal infrastructure, built purely to manage relationships with a few dozen people worldwide, still make basic business sense for a company of Pagani's relatively modest overall size? For a brand whose entire identity rests on scarcity and craftsmanship rather than volume, it may be the only strategy that actually makes sense. Consider, too, how differently these ultra-rare Paganis age compared to a mass-produced supercar rolled out in the thousands. A Huayra, built in a run of 8, or a Zonda built in a run of 3, does not compete against next year's model the way an ordinary production car does. Can a car even be considered outdated if there are only 3 or 5 of them, and next year's lineup was never designed to replace it in the first place? Not in any meaningful sense. It was about being one of a number so small that the car essentially becomes its own permanent category, immune to the usual depreciation curve that governs almost every other vehicle on the road. The hypercar that money couldn't buy. Not every entry in this story fits the pattern of a billionaire commissioning a masterpiece. The Mercedes-Maybach Exelero stands apart from almost everything else discussed so far, precisely because it was never built for a wealthy client at all. The one-off Exelero was commissioned in 2004 by Fulda, the German arm of tire giant Goodyear, purely as a high-performance tire testing platform. It needed to be heavy enough to put serious load on the tires being tested and capable of exceeding 217 miles per hour to generate meaningful data at extreme speed.
This car was actually presented to public in 2005. This is a one-of-one build, and it's a project in cooperation with Maybach and Fulda. Fulda is a tire company in Germany.
Built on the existing Maybach 57 platform and designed by 4 students from a German university rather than an in-house design team, the Exelero developed 690 horsepower, modest by the standards of the other cars in this story, but more than sufficient for its actual. Does a car built purely to survive punishing tire tests really belong alongside $32 million commissioned masterpieces built for the world's wealthiest collectors? On paper, no. After its testing regime concluded, the Exelero took on a second life nobody involved in its original commission could have predicted. It appeared on television programs and in a Jay-Z music video, transforming from an industrial testing tool into a genuine pop culture artifact almost by accident. Could any manufacturer have deliberately engineered that kind of unplanned cultural crossover if they had actually tried? Almost certainly not. The appeal only worked because none of it was staged. Today, it resides permanently inside the Dietz-Holztal Automobile Museum, part of the Friedhelm Loh collection. No longer performing tire tests, no longer chasing a public role, simply preserved as one of the strangest one-off vehicles in modern automotive history. There is a useful contrast worth drawing here with Tesla's approach to exclusivity, which sits at a completely different scale but follows a surprisingly similar underlying logic. The Tesla Signature Series limited its production run to exactly 250 Model S units and 106-seat Model X units, each priced at $159,420, and made available only to customers Tesla itself selected. For a brand built almost entirely on direct sales and simplified, ritual-free ordering, that shift toward manufacturer-controlled, invite-only access marked a genuine departure from everything the company had represented up to that point. Even Tesla, in other words, eventually decided that some of its cars were worth treating less like products and more like invitations, and a single pattern holds across all of them regardless of price, brand, or origin story. The Droptail, the Chiron Profilée, the Divo, the Zonda Barchetta, the Huayra Codalunga, even the accidental fame of the Excelero. None of them ended up in an owner's garage purely because that owner had enough money to buy one. Is there a single car in this entire story that reached its owner through nothing more than an open checkbook? Not one. Each required in its own way the right relationship, the right timing, or in the Excelero's case, an entirely different original purpose altogether. Unlimited wealth remains the starting requirement for this world. It has simply stopped being the finish line. What does this shift ultimately mean for anyone outside this small circle, watching from a distance, whether they will ever be in a position to buy a car like this or not? It reframes what genuine automotive exclusivity even represents in the current era. For most of the 20th century, the story of an expensive car was fundamentally a story about engineering. Top speed records, horsepower figures, acceleration times that pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible at a given moment. Those numbers still matter inside this world, and every car discussed in this video backs up its price with real, verifiable performance behind it. But increasingly, the more interesting story sitting underneath the specifications is about relationships and access controlled almost entirely by a small number of people inside a handful of companies. That shift raises one final question worth sitting with. If the rarest cars in the world are no longer defined primarily by what they can do, but by who is allowed to own them, has the hypercar industry quietly transformed into something closer to fine art dealing than traditional manufacturing? The evidence gathered across every car in this video points fairly clearly toward yes. And if that transformation continues at its current pace, the gap between simply being wealthy and actually being invited into this world is only likely to widen further in the years ahead, regardless of how large anyone's bank account eventually becomes. 4 Droptails. Every car in this story reached its owner through something money alone could never buy: a relationship, the right timing, or in the Excelero's case, a purpose nobody intended to sell. The hypercar world has quietly stopped being about who can pay the most and started being about who gets asked at all. Being a billionaire still gets you in the room. It has simply stopped being the thing that gets you the car. If this gave you the full picture, hit like, drop your thoughts below, and subscribe.